So greetings from Pennsylvania once again, and we're long overdue for another video on the Doan gang. A little series here on lost treasure in Pennsylvania. And I did that intro video a couple months ago, I think back in May. We visited the grave site of Levi and Abraham Doan, where they're buried just outside of on the other side of the stone wall in that Quaker cemetery. I want to explain why they were buried there. Give you a bit of history on the Doan gang. I'm not going to go over all that history again. It's in that video is in my playlist on treasure in Pennsylvania. But yeah, today we're here. We're in my home county, Berks, just like south of the town of Wernersville. And actually, this is years ago I kind of filmed a bit on the Doan gang. I was learning about them, and this place intrigued me. But just to let you know where we are, this is Sportsman's Road. Up that way is Wernersville. Well, of course, up that way first is the State Hospital, just kind of like southeast of Wernersville. Of course, then Robsonia and Womelsdorf are up that way. And this is the South Mountain area, because Sportsman's Road continues up this way, up higher into the South Mountain region. And where we are now is a small section of Pennsylvania State Forest in that area, so it kind of works that we can come here and film. But when I was first doing research on the Doan gang years ago, I thought, oh, that's cool, there's a gang and potentially lost treasure out there. Then when I came across a excerpt from somewhere that there's potentially some of their loot buried here in Berks County, just not too far from where I live, that really piqued my interest. I have a book that I'm going to show you in a moment. I'm going to read the excerpt from there describing what is potentially out here. So just a bit of a brief overview again of the Doan gang. They operated during the Revolutionary War era, 1770s, 1780s. They often aided the British as spies, robbed at tax collectors and things like that, horse thieves. Talked about all the things they did and their eventual capture and what happened to each member. And they are more known for operating more over in what's called Bucks County. Not so much over this way in Berks County, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. Alright, so we found a little place to sit. The mosquitoes are horrible out here, just so you know. But here I have this book called, I'll give you a closer look in a minute. It's called A Guide to Treasure in Pennsylvania by Michael Henson. Like I said, I'll show it closer in a bit, but I want to read you the excerpt from here. And this little excerpt was found on other pages too, like other website pages, not just in books and stuff. Gotta find it again. Alright, I need to get my other glasses on here too, my reading glasses. Like I said, you can find this multiple places. Alright, it's titled here, Berks County. So, for years, the Doan gang of Tories had looted and terrorized the Pennsylvania countryside. Finally, in 1777, that date is important, I'll say why later, farmers of Berks, Lancaster, and Lebanon counties revolted, surrounded the gang in Indian Gap, near Wernersville, and practically wiped them out. The gang's vast treasure, resulting from years of looting, is believed buried near the scene of their last stand. And here's what the book looks like. If you're interested in buying it yourself, it has all kinds of stories and information in here about different sites in Pennsylvania. I've already made several other videos from stories in here. So that story mentions, Berks County, mentions Wernersville, which, like I said, is just right there. But it mentions Indian Gap. So where in the world is Indian Gap? Like I said, we're in the South Mountain area. I was researching this again today. I looked at some old maps, nothing's labeled Indian Gap in the area, but there are several gaps here in the South Mountain area that come from like Wernersville and maybe closer to Robsonia. That could be that. One thing I gotta say though, I think my first video I filmed about this years ago, there is a place called Indian Town Gap, way up more in Lebanon County, where the military base is. That's not what this story is talking about, so don't confuse the two. But the other thing too is that where the state hospital is today, I did read that there were several Indian villages located there. So, and this particular gap comes right out to that spot, so it makes sense that maybe this is what they're referring to as Indian Gap. I'm going to toss up a map of this area and point out where I'm at right now. So if that story is true, I believe this gap that we're in is perhaps what the story is referring to as Indian Gap. I'm not convinced, to be honest, I'm not convinced this story is true. We'll talk about that in a moment, like I said. But there was one other person that I came across researching today. After lunchtime, I was looking up some things, who agreed with me that this perhaps is the Indian Gap they're talking about, rather than some that are closer to Robizonia, because the story mentions Warnersville, so you would think it'd be the one that's closer to Warnersville. So, if you remember that date, 1777, we'll talk about that in a moment. Yeah, so once again, the gist of that story is that the Doan gang was in this area, and the farmers and locals were, pissed off at them, I guess you could say, and kind of surrounded them here in the gap, which would not be all that difficult to do, and that they were nearly wiped out. But before they were wiped out, or captured, their leader, supposedly Moses, buried the treasure here in the gap somewhere. Or some stories I've come across said that they dropped it down into an old well in the area, maybe further back into the gap here. So there's different variations. Some say it was buried here along one of the steep hillsides, or dropped down into an old well. And I've come across several different treasure hunting forums where people claim they're pretty sure they know which well it is or which property owner, but they can't get permission. So there's different, the variations of the story going around. But some things that lead me to think that perhaps there's some untruth to the story, or that not everything is quite as it should be, is that year 1777. If you remember from, I'll cover some of that history again, but the Doan gang was active up until 1783, maybe even a little bit beyond that, but that's when some of the gang, I think it's when Moses died in 1783, and sorry, there's bugs flying into my ear, and that's pretty much when the activity stopped. So they were not wiped out in 1777. They were kind of at the height of their activity, going on into 1778, 79, 80, 81, 83. They were very active. So the idea that they were wiped out in 1777 is not true. But it could be possible that instead of 1777, that date should be 1787. That's a possibility, but I think some of the main members were captured before then. Like I said, Moses died. Their leader died in 1783. In a failed attempt to capture him, he was killed. And Levi and Abraham, I believe, were captured around that time too. They were hung in 1788. So, I don't know. Parts of that story don't quite fit in. And the fact that they're all over here in Berks County, when most of their activity occurred in Bucks County. So, but maybe they did come out all the way this way too. Who knows? But that's often the way it is with these old stories. Sometimes is a kernel of truth, but over the years the story changes, gets exaggerated, names change, dates change. So that could be true with this story. Because like I said, when I first discovered this story, and it's mentioned Berks County and stuff, in the Warnersville area, I was really excited. I thought, oh, cool, there could be buried treasure here in my backyard. As I've done more research on it, I kind of start to wonder if perhaps this story isn't entirely true. I mean, the Doan gang definitely existed. They definitely did a lot of looting and stealing and all that kind of activity, all kinds of hideouts here and there. But this story is the only one that we read about them all the way over here in Berks and Lebanon County. And like I said, the date doesn't quite match up with either. But like I said, maybe there's still kernel truth to the story. But hey, if you know more about the story, if you want to share some information down below in the comments, if you know exactly where the treasure is, you don't have to tell us. But you can, if you have more information about the story, feel free to say something down below. Or if you have your own thoughts on the matter or the story, some comments you want to make, feel free to say something down below as well in the comments. What you think is going on here with this legend. And once again, down here's the road, Sportsman's Road. Like I said, that leads up towards the state hospital, towards Warnersville. So if there is some truth to the story, perhaps somewhere in this section of State Forest, this is part of the William Penn District State Forest area, there could be some stuff hidden out here. Of course, the rules on metal detecting on state forest land change all the time from different places I read on a website, so I'm not really sure what the rules are on that. So just keep that in mind. You decide to come out here and start swinging a metal detector around. I was thinking about it, but I don't know. Like I said, I read a couple different websites and they all kind of disagree. Apparently you can get permission, but it seems to depend on individual rangers and anyway, so I decided to let that go. Because I'm not entirely sure the story is true. I just see a really cool mushroom up there. I know this is history video on treasure, but maybe we'll take a look at that mushroom up there. If you can see it straight up ahead there. But maybe the mushroom will lead us to the treasure of the Doan gang. Wouldn't that be something? It's a symbol. Yeah, check this thing out. This thing is huge. Wow. Did it just fall off, or is it? Anyway, let me put my hand there. You can see how big this thing is. It's a chicken mushroom, it's called. But yeah, that thing's huge. It's saying buried treasure here. But if that treasure was here in this gap somewhere, I mean, you could metal detect your whole life and potentially not find it, especially depending on how deep it was buried. And we just, like this might not even be the correct gap. And this story may not even entirely be true either, so something to consider. But yeah, what if it is? What if there is something buried out here in these woods? Lost treasure waiting to be found. Or as in some versions of the story state that it was down at the bottom of someone's well living in the area. Because that well could have been long coated over or filled in too. Who knows? Yeah, like I said, but as I said, if you know more, you want to share that, please, by all means, go ahead and do so down below. Or you can do your own research too. It was difficult to find a lot of information about this story. Like a lot of it's just repeating what was in the book. That's a little excerpt. But feel free to do some research yourself as well. All right, but we'll make our way back down to the road here. Leave that giant mushroom behind and the buried treasure. Yeah, I should mention too, even if you do find stuff, you just can't come out here digging a big hole in state forest land. Well, you could, but you wouldn't want to get caught. Yeah, so as I said, interesting story. If you live in the area like I do, it gets your blood moving a little bit, thinking about, what's out here? Then you realize you'd have a whole lot of ground to cover. You would need more information, I think, as to some kind of landmark or something that was mentioned as to where they put the treasure, rather than just somewhere in a place called Indian Gap, which isn't even on the maps anymore. All right, I think that'll be it for this one, folks. There's more Doan stories to tell, more places to go. Some involve caves and things like that, so there'll be more coming up. Hopefully a place that isn't so buggy. It's kind of mid-August right now. The bugs are pretty bad. But yeah, all right. Well, like I said before, if you want to share some information or your own thoughts on the story, by all means do so below. But I think that'll be it, folks. Thanks for coming along, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one.